Shakur Stevenson exposes ESPN boxing bias for certain fighters, and Max Kellerman exposes that exact same bias through his actions in the Shakur Stevenson interview. That's what we're going to talk about in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel, subscribers. If you're not subscribed, subscribe. I want to thank you guys so much for your support on the Patreon. It's growing. Definitely for my Patreon subscribers, check out the last one that we uploaded today. It's about the Me Too movement and a professor at Harvard University and how it's kind of like, you know, that wake-up call that people get. Definitely check that out on Patreon. Also, thank you to everybody that supports in the super chat, in the live streams, and definitely check us out Sunday morning on OG Boxing Talk. Now, let's get to this. Shakur Stevenson was on Max on Boxing. Max on Boxing is a television show, boxing show on ESPN that is hosted by Max Kellerman, formerly of HBO Boxing, and now he is doing his boxing thing over there at ESPN. He interviews Shakur Stevenson in the lead up to the fight that he has this Saturday. I'm making this video on Saturday, so it's actually in a few hours. The fight against Shakur Stevenson has on ESPN. In the midst of this argument, and shout out to Black Fight Fan TV who made a video about it. Fred from Barbershop Conversations also, I saw a video that brought it to my attention, and I do believe that Blue Blood Sports TV also made a video, brought it to my attention, and then I went and watched Max on Boxing. Because otherwise I would never watch Max on Boxing, because I think that Max on Boxing is probably nothing different than what you get, and it proved to be right, than you got from Harold Letterman Jim Lampley, when Jim Lampley was on HBO. Now, Max Kellerman, in talking with Shakur Stevenson, let me tell you what Shakur Stevenson said. He said that he felt that he was not being represented as and promoted as heavily by Top Rank and ESPN as Teofimo Lopez was. And in the midst of doing this, he talked about how he wasn't getting the interviews with Andre Ward and Tim Bradley and all of that. And then Max Kellerman says, but hey, you know, I think he said this is not an interview, but hey, we're having a conversation on this show. So, you know, clearly we're promoting you. But then he went on to talk about Teofimo Lopez for several minutes to Shakur Stevenson. The whole interview almost was talking about comparing him to Teofimo Lopez and how Teofimo Lopez had a knockout style. How Teofimo Lopez was bilingual and therefore he might be able to appeal to the Mexican fight fans. That how he has this really big personality like Floyd Mayweather. And since Teofimo Lopez has all of these really, really great things, how do you compare yourself to him, Shakur Stevenson? So, Shakur Stevenson, let me get this straight, what I'm saying. Shakur Stevenson was complaining to Max Kellerman about the fact that Teofimo Lopez has this big name and is getting this a lot of press because ESPN is spending so much time promoting him. Max Kellerman says in the interview, hey, I'm in the midst of promoting you right now. And then Max Kellerman then proceeds to say a couple nice words about Shakur Stevenson, but then promote Teofimo Lopez and basically say how much more of an upside he has as this big commercial star because he's a knockout puncher, because he speaks Spanish, and because he's got a really big personality. That's exactly what Shakur Stevenson was complaining about. Now, Shakur Stevenson was talking about who? Did he say? He said Top Rank, and he said ESPN. Who is ESPN's mouthpiece in this particular circumstance, and what channel is this interview on? It's on ESPN. About a fight for Shakur Stevenson. And they're promoting Teofimo Lopez. I was like, man, what am I listening to here, man? Does this dude think does he think that people are stupid? Yes, he does. Or people aren't going to notice that. But I noticed it, and they did exactly what Shakur Stevenson said he was doing. Now, there was something else in this interview that I cannot get past. Max Kellerman talking about championships. He says that he's talking about boxing. This is before the interview with Shakur Stevenson. He lays out this current state of boxing in which he says, using the truth to sell his lie. Use the truth to pitch his sale would probably be the better way to say that. He talks and compares boxing to college football and says how you have all these different belts. And you have the BO, you have the BF, you have the BA, right? All of that. You have the BC belts, the BC belt. And really, how all these guys have all these championships. So, how can the fans know who the champion is? Because, just because, the Rose Bowl is the national championship game that particular year, that doesn't mean they're the best team. So boxing is becoming increasingly like college football. No, it was always like that. But he then goes on to mention conferences. How the conferences, where you have, the Big 10, the Big 12. If there are people that are in the United States, those are the conferences that the college athletics are in. So the Big 10, the Big 12, the SEC, the ACC, all of that, right? And he compares that to the sanction, to the networks, and says how, the way it really is now is we really don't have champions. You really just have like conference tournaments, really. So you have the DAZN League, and you have the Showtime League, and you have the Fox League, and you have the ESPN League, which interestingly enough, he had Golden Boy over the sign. If you look at it carefully enough, it said ESPN Golden Boy. It didn't say ESPN Top Rank. It said ESPN Golden Boy. But then he proceeds to make the argument that there aren't any real champions in boxing. There's just title holders. No real champions, just title holders, which is true. But if you listen to what he said next and think, okay, well, you just started mentioning to Shakur Stevenson that in order to be considered a great, you need to be the pound for pound king. Don't you think, Shakur Stevenson, that you need to be the pound for pound top guy in order to be considered an all-time great? What? Max? You just said that the sanctioning bodies championships don't mean anything because there's so many different sanctioning bodies and there's so many different networks siloed. But you're going to proposition that the pound for pound list is the means by which you can establish who the great fighter is? There's a million pound for pound lists. You have a pound for pound list. I have a pound for pound list. My neighbor has a pound for pound list. ESPN has a pound for pound list. Ring has a pound for pound list. Sporting News has a pound for pound list. Your great grandmom and great granddaddy can have pound for pound lists. Pound for pound lists are completely and utterly subjective. So why would you say that the sanctioning bodies, which at least are objective, in that they have an objective, even though it might be flawed, they have an actual ranking system. They have an actual champion, and they have actual fights that are in the ring. We should abandon that for the idea that pound for pound lists that are generated by journalists is somehow a superior way in which to figure out who the best fighter was. And I also find it very ironic that when he talked about ESPN fighters, they were future pound for pound guys. Shakur Stevenson, you are my guy for number one pound for pound. You are a top prospect in boxing. You are a top prospect in boxing. Teofimo Lopez is a top prospect in boxing. And you guys will eventually become the guy that can surpass who? Vasily Lomachenko, who is, by what many people consider, and many being him, Max Kellerman, them, ESPN, the pound for pound top guy. Now, I find it interesting, don't you see a little coincidence here, that they didn't mention Terrence Crawford by name as the pound for pound guy, and they didn't mention Alexander Usyk as the top pound for pound guy, when those two guys actually solved the problem of all of these different sanctioning bodies by winning a belt in all of them. By winning a belt in all of them. So if there's anybody, according to this logic that he has where he's addressing what the problem in boxing is, which is all these sanctioning bodies, and they're not really being a champion, that would mean that nobody that has not unified belts, all of the belts, aren't a champion, which means Vasyl Lomachenko's not a champion. None of these other fighters are champions. None of the guys at welterweight are champions. However, I did find it interesting that when he pointed out all the problems, and he actually said that the winner of Manny Pacquiao and Keith Thurman will not be for a championship. Really? Well, what did you say about when you mentioned Richard Comey, who just so happens to be fighting on your network, and Vasyl Lomachenko, who just happens to be fighting on your network? They were champions. They were pound for pound guys, but the people who weren't in your silo were not. So, look, man, Max Kellerman gets on my nerves. Max Kellerman busy, just wow. I thought HBO was gone, but man, HBO ain't gone. It lives on in Max Kellerman. I thought that the Gotti list and all that nonsense was gone, but no. Now it's been replaced by the ESPN pound for pound list as some respectable way to measure who the best champion in the world is. The subjective opinion of a bunch of boxing writers. Anyway, it is what it is. Let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Peace.